So this morning's text, we have a lot going on in a very short period. And I want to talk about some of kind of the historical pieces in ways that the text has perhaps been misunderstood. And it's interesting how over time, even if we think of a text that was written knocking on 2,000 years ago, how even in my brief span of 30 years of ministry, thinking has shifted in regards to the lesson that we have. So the text that we have, Jesus shows up to a certain town, and there is Martha and Mary. Now, there's a lot going on already as we get to just that spot. So we're going to talk about some of the historical cultural pieces to begin with. If we cycle back 2,000 years and we hear that Martha welcomes Jesus into her home, our first thought is, where is the man? There is no man in this story, right? So how does Martha have a home? Now, to our modern ears, that sounds ridiculous and backwards, but again, we're talking about the first century here. And it's very clear historically that there would have been scenarios where a woman would have her own home. Often this would be the case where there are no other male relatives to whom a home would go to. And particularly if there are, say, a family that the remainder is two daughters, say Martha and Mary. And so to their home, Martha is the host, which would not have ordinarily been a role that would have fallen to a woman in that time and place. Now, if we go back to the icon, the painting that is over the sink in the narthex, and we think of the story of Abraham at his tent welcoming the Lord who is embodied in three persons in that story, who shows up. Abraham is the host in this account, which we might look at as the guy who lays around and does nothing and chats up the visitors, right? And so who is doing the work in that story? The work. It is Sarah who is doing the work in that story, along with a cast of supporting servants and slaves and others to prepare the meal, to get the food ready. Sarah has enough free time to eavesdrop at the flap of the tent, and that's a story that we don't get today. But nonetheless, we have this curious cultural story here of Martha and Mary bringing Jesus into their home. Now, this is a big deal. This is a big deal to have Jesus in their home. Now, we, I think, don't lose that fact over 2,000 years. Jesus is in town. You got the ticket. He's coming to your house. I mean, that's like the best backstage pass ever, right? And it's a big deal. He is an itinerant rabbi, a teacher, right? But he is famous. Now, this is before TikTok and any of his dances would have gone viral or anything like that. But nonetheless, even though people might not have recognized him on the street because of that, he was a known figure, a name that people knew, because his teaching was beyond what they were familiar with. They were excited about the movement that he was generating. They had also heard amazing stories about miracles that he had done. And so to have him in your home was a big deal. Now, we take a couple of steps forward to the things that are happening in the house. We have Martha, who is working her fingers to the bone. She is welcomed Jesus into her home. She has done all of the cooking. She's done all of the cleaning. She's done all of the moving furniture to various places. In my in-laws, this would have involved pulling a couple of chairs out of a closet that had to have legs screwed into them and brought to the table to make sure there was enough space. I mean, in your own house, you can picture the things that would have to happen, right? Because this is a big deal. And then there's the sister who's not doing anything. I'm sure you have never in your life had this experience, but you can imagine the angst. Now, we can picture, perhaps, that Martha at many turns, perhaps, would have gone to Mary and said, "Come on, there's work to be done. What are you doing laying around?" But then she escalates it. Now think about that. You are the host of the guest. You go to the guest to complain about your sister. Suddenly we have this kind of wonky dynamic. Now I have younger siblings, and I understand sibling frustration. That could happen. But there is something curious when we look at this text a little deeper. So Martha is concerned about all of the work that she has to do. And you'll note the word, there are tasks. But when she approaches Jesus, she uses the word work, right? She uses the word work. Now, she didn't speak English, so she didn't use the word work. She used a word that we translate to work. If we go back a couple of steps and remember that the language being spoken at that place probably was Aramaic, a Semitic language related to Arabic, Hebrew, would have been the common tongue that they would have spoken to one another. That's the language that Jesus would have spoken for most of his ministry. Koine Greek, common Greek, is not classical Greek. So if you know classical Greek, Homer, the Iliad, it's not that Greek. If you were to get on a plane and go visit Athens, it is not that Greek today either. You do well on the alphabet, but outside of that, you would struggle. Common Greek is the trading language of the Mediterranean. It would have been common at the time in Greece, of course. In Italy, it would have been very common as a local dialect. And in most kind of international cultural exchange kind of communities, that would have been a quick second language for many people all throughout the Mediterranean. That is the language of the New Testament. So already getting to Greek, we are using a language that was not the language that was spoken by Mary and Martha and Jesus on a daily basis. And now we are to English. Now there are words that get translated differently. So in Greek, there is a word that references the ministry of oversight. So one who supervises, who oversees. That word is episkopos. And if that sounds a little bit like Episcopal, it's because that's where we get that word. The ministry of episkopos, oversight, bishops. So in the United States, or classically in Christianity, traditions that are organized around their bishops are episcopal traditions. And one of those even is named Episcopal. The Episcopal Church, the Methodist Church, the Roman Catholic Church, many of the Orthodox churches have bishops and are organized around them, episkopos. We have bishops, but we're not organized around them. So that's a separate story. There's another word, presbyters. That sounds a little bit like Presbyterian. It's because that's where we get that word. We would translate it as priests. The Presbyterian tradition is one that is organized around their priests. We use the word pastor, but same word. There is another Greek word that fills out the roster of what we call the threefold ministry of the classic church: bishop, priest, and deacon. Now, in the ELCA, we're familiar due to Elizabeth Hood and her trajectory to becoming a deacon in the ELCA. But deacons in the ELCA and the Lutheran Church in North America are new. In fact, you don't need all of the fingers on two hands to count how many years they've been around. It is not many. The word that is used in the gospel text that we have today, that Martha uses in going to Jesus and saying, "Do you not care that my sister Mary is sitting there doing nothing and leaving all of the work to me?" The Greek word under that word work is diakonia. It is where we get the English word deacon. Work, one who serves. Curiously, the text is often related to the issue of serving at table. So often in the life of the church, the deacon is the one who is the social outreach of a community, the one who feeds the hungry and works with the poor. That is traditionally the work of deacons. Okay, that was a lot of language there. But what I wanted to point out today is that there is a traditional way that we have worked with this text. It is that Martha has just been a busybody doing work that was not all that important when Jesus was there, and she should have been sitting listening to Jesus, and Mary was doing the better thing. When we look at the language that is directly used, diakonia, the work that Martha is about is not meaningless busyness. It is valuable and important work that she is doing. She is being a deacon in that context. This is valuable work. But it is not the only work that those who follow Jesus are about. And she is understanding, or coming to understand, that her sister's work in sitting and listening directly to Christ is valuable work as well. Now that's tricky, because having younger siblings, I was almost universally under the impression that what I was doing was most important. And what they were doing was kind of an order of magnitude less. I'm sure you've never had that experience. But there is this sense, historically, that what we looked at Martha in regards to her work was that it was meaningless work. But rather, in the body of Christ, where we understand that we all have different gifts and vocations, challenges, do we always recognize that the work of the other may be just as valid and necessary as the work that we are about? Again, it is this human condition of ours to put ourselves in the center of the universe, right? What I am doing is primary. It is most important. What you are doing comes second. Christ in this story changes that understanding. Now, the last thing I want to leave with you is a sense of the current church over and against this story. We're kind of at a spot where I would say a pendulum swing, where we are all about what Martha is doing. We have a lot of interest in political action, in serving those who are hurting, a lot of social ministries and social justice-oriented ministries, which are valuable, important, and amazing. But I also feel a little bit like we're at a part of the pendulum swing where listening directly to Jesus and learning and deepening our faith and coming closer to Him is something that maybe isn't as much valued. And perhaps a recognition that we need to be doing both of those things together. The one informing the other, informing the other, informing the other. So as we hear this story, maybe perhaps with new ears on the understanding of what Martha is about, and recognizing that those of us in our community, those sitting with you this morning, are bringing different gifts to the community, and that they are of equal value to what we bring as individuals, but also a recognition that sometimes in our busyness, we lose track of turning our faces and our ears and our hearts towards Christ, that we might listen, that we might draw close. Amen. Please stand as you are able.